Hi, I'm Andrew Rimby, the host of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, a public humanities podcast where I interview writers, scholars, performers, and artists. Episodes air on Mondays.
And I'm married to Pippi, host of True Crime in Academia, an Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast. True Crime in Academia is a true crime podcast focused on crimes committed by or to those in academia. Episodes air on Tuesdays.
Make sure you follow Ivory Tower Boiler Room
And True Crime in Academia
on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Become a subscriber to get unedited video interviews and our merchandise at patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. When you're listening to our podcast episodes, imagine that you're in a cafe eavesdropping on our conversations. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, Chris here. So this is part 2 of our episode of Gone with the Wind. If you couldn't tell by our part 1, we had such a great rhythm together that we thought we would let our listeners enjoy it by adding more of our insight to what we know of this film. Hope you enjoy it.
All right, everyone. So we're back. Welcome back to our podcast on Old Gay Classic Cinema. We're back with Ashley. We're now going to discuss how the film holds up and what aspects we, as a queer audience, can take away from it. There are many aspects that we can take away from this film, but I believe the one thing that we must discuss that needs to be, that I believe has been put on the threshold many, many a times that we need to be held accountable for is the quote-unquote act of slavery in this film. The way that it's depicted, the way that it's shown is not in its respect a way that we're used to in our history books. We're used to believe that slavery was master and slave. We have the slave in chains. We have them in tattered clothing. With this film, their mental capacity is still in that aspect, but with the way that they're dressed, they're very well provided for. And I believe that it shows in this film. I think that's what they kind of wanted to show in this film, is that just because we're depicting slaves doesn't mean that we're depicting them the way that you believe that they're supposed to be depicted. So I wanted to get Nate's response on how this film holds up and what he takes away from it, especially in the slavery aspect. Nate?
Thank you, Chris. So obviously first, I will presence first and foremost that I am white, and that is my ethnic background. And again, like I said in the beginning of the episode, I've always grown up in the North. My family has pretty much always been up North. Either they fought for the Union if they were here for the Civil War, or they were not even here when the Civil War occurred. So this is my perspective, and obviously presencing that I have limited capacity to speak on this. And I think if we're asking the question if the film holds up or if it's gone with the wind, is the thing that holds up is a lot of the technical aspects of this film. This film has beautiful cinematography. The way that each scene is laid, it's set, it's framed, beautiful for storytelling and beautiful thematically. And the costumes, the intricate details of the costumes, the intricate details of the sets, the little things that you catch here and there. The fact that there's like a fairy tale scene in Bonnie's bedroom and stained glass of like a knight in shining armor in a castle, kind of representing that this is supposed to be Camelot in a way. This is supposed to be the ideal situation. It's just beautiful and it's breathtaking. The music is gorgeous and instantly recognizable. There's so many themes throughout this that if you heard it out and about, you would probably recognize it from the film. The acting, a masterclass. Beautiful examples of acting being reacting, the actors truly being in the moment and really truly understanding their characters. I don't think there's a single person that was miscast in this film. I think everyone was beautifully cast, and knowing who was around in 1939, I don't think anyone could have done any part better than those actors. I think they really did do a wonderful job casting those folks in those roles. That being said, what I feel doesn't hold up is obviously some of the more specific themes of this film. And the way I kind of conceptualize this and the way that I thought about it while I was watching this film is it is very representative of this idea of the Old South in its own way, because on the surface level of it, it is beautiful. It looks beautiful. The costumes are beautiful. The colors are beautiful. The Technicolor is gorgeous in this film. And on the surface, it seems to be, I'm going to use Melanie's words in the beginning of the movie, a world that only exists to be graceful and beautiful. And when you look deeper into it, it's not real life. It is not the reality of this time period. It is not the reality of the people who actually would have been living these experiences. And much like the Old South, I think the deeper you get into it and the reality of it, the less beautiful it becomes. And I think this film exists and it will continue to be a time capsule of how people, when the film was made, viewed the Civil War, maybe. And I think there was still trying to perpetuate this myth of, well, there are two sides to it. There were some enslaved folks who wanted to be there and were treated well, and they were better off because they were there. That's purely a myth. That's not based on any evidence that we have. That's not based on any reality that we have. They try to, I think, play the middle of the road, because obviously they do, we're watching these people for 4 hours and they can't be complete villains. Otherwise we have no empathy for any of them. So they're trying to play that middle of the road. They do have the Northerners in the film kind of portrayed as being villainous, and you have the overseer who gets a girl pregnant out of wedlock and then she loses the baby, or you have the man, the carpetbagger, talking about 40 acres and a mule to the recently freed people and showing them sort of trying to be taking advantage of these poor people who are not smart enough to know that he's trying to swindle them or that he's selling them false hope, because we also know that a lot of these people who were free did not get what was actually promised to them. And they did not get these things. So I think it tries to do these little winks and a nudge of well, yeah, no, both sides are kind of flawed, and kind of skirting around the realities of what slavery was and the horrors of it. And I think that's what this movie will eventually become, is it will become a time capsule. I don't think this is going to be a movie that continues to age gracefully. I think it already has not aged gracefully, and the wrinkles have been present for quite some time, and I think they're just going to continue to show. That's kind of how I view it from this 2022 lens. Do I think it's going to go away forever? I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if it really will ever go away forever, because even when the tragedy of George Floyd happened, HBO Max removed it from their streaming temporarily. And when they did that, it became the top bought movie on iTunes. And it was number 5 in the top 5 of Amazon. This film that has been around since 1939, all of a sudden shooting to the top of these things, these lists, when something like this happens. And I think that goes to show that this film will always have a life in some way. I don't know if it will always have a life for the right reasons, though. I don't know if people will be watching it just to appreciate the cinematography, the acting, the costumes, the sets. I'm very worried that the legacy of this film will be overshadowed by the darker themes of it. And I don't know if this will be a film that will be mandatory viewing forever. That is my thought. That is my perspective. Like I said, I have a limited perspective. That is what I personally feel having watched the movie. Is it will live on, but I don't know if it will live on for the right reasons. But what do you both think? I've been talking for a long time.
No, I think you captured that theme very eloquently with giving respect to all different aspects. I absolutely agree in terms of cinematography, the acting, the set design, costume design, the music, all of that is beautifully captured, beautifully done. I don't think anyone could have done any better. And I think that also serves to the aspect of not just the time period that they're covering and it being set in the Deep South. So, like you said, it's a perfect time capsule for that Deep South attitude towards the war, which you're right, growing up in the North, that's not really an attitude that we read a lot about. That's not how it's portrayed in history books. And to that aspect, it gives it a little humanity in terms of like it not feeling like such a foreign war that was held so long ago, because it is part of our past. And through different backgrounds and family, the different sides have been passed down and watered down through to the next generations. Like you mentioned, my family doesn't really have roots here during the Civil War, so that's not something that was rooted in our family. But we do see it, especially in 2022 and the years leading up to where we are now. It's a topic that keeps getting brought up in different ways through, I think we can agree, in some sort of traumatic generational experience further than passed down. To that aspect, I think what pushes it into a darker theme and overshadows, I think, not only just the tone of maybe, and how I tried to watch it when I was younger, growing up through high school and understanding the different tones that were surrounding all of that kind of history, was maybe not taking it so literally as I did when I was younger and just taking it as a literal, oh, this is a romantic war story. And it's not. There's other deeper layers I just couldn't fathom when I was younger. But just taking it for maybe not a literal sense and just as a portrayal of an attitude during a historically intense time frame in American history. So in that aspect, I hope that time capsule stays and continues, and not necessarily people can appreciate it in that way, but it's not something that's pushed down and buried as shameful. What I think is shameful is what was happening in history at the time the movie came out. So obviously we know that it was kind of on the heels of we've got World War II, and coming further out of the Great Depression, but a very depressing time frame again in American history. Also, I think not too long before, and I should have done research on it, but them actually going back and historically trying to catalog real life testaments from former slaves or from the families of former slaves was something that was more recent at that time this movie was coming out. So again, like you kind of mentioned, not really acknowledging the horrors of slavery. We just kind of started to attempt to do that. And especially in certain places of the country, that's not something that was an accepted attitude to even hear about. And so we've got segregation going on. Even though slavery is no longer an issue, we still have the downward spiral of the after effects and oppression, especially in the Deep South. And then we all know, with Mamie's character, the actress being in what we would consider more modern times than the time frame it's portraying, still being discriminated against because of her color, though she won an award for her brilliant acting, and albeit a character that, you know, is portrayed in a very specific tone that wasn't accurate to how someone would have been in her position at that time and or felt, but she portrayed it beautifully, and she definitely deserved the award. But I remember in the TCM mentioned that you noted, Nate, where they were giving that kind of intro into the background of the movie and the time frame that was going on with the movie. I remember they mentioned that in the room at the award show, she wasn't even permitted to sit with her co-stars. Even after accepting that award, she gave her speech. She was sat in the back of the room at a table by herself. I mean, that is what I think is more deplorable, because that's not excusable. Not saying slavery is excusable whatsoever, but the fact that they choose to do a film like this and have it portrayed already in a very controversial kind of attitude and glimpse into the past, but then further kind of just diminish any sort of, I don't know, recognition, or, you know, use it to show notification, awareness of those horrors. They just completely decide not to take that opportunity, disregard it, and disregard not only her, but, you know, imagine her winning an award, probably being one of the most notable Black actresses in that movie, what they would probably consider a notable role in that movie, in air quotes. But I can't imagine if that's how they treated her, how were others in that film treated? I mean, just the quotes alone with some of the things that they were quoted saying, as far as like them acting as slaves, like, you know, having to dig trenches in between the Yankee soldiers coming down and Atlanta's defense, but they were happy to do so. Obviously, that's an incorrect attitude, but just the fact of the climate that was centered after the movie coming out, being publicized, awards after the fact, just that I think is worse. And that's where I think a lot of the shame comes from, because you would have hoped at that point it would be more progressive, and it just wasn't. Just the attitudes even surrounding those that were in the film of a different color, which is upsetting.
And I think even the film, like I mentioned earlier in the episode, the film does try to sanitize in some way, shape, or form what happens in the book. They change the language. They also change a key aspect, and I want to presence this because this is something that's noticeably absent in the movie compared to the book. And I will say another way that this film stands out is I think any author would want their book to be as faithfully adapted as this film was, because they really kept everything in the story. The things that they really excluded were just things not really crucial to the plot, like Scarlett has 2 other kids before she has Bonnie. She has a kid from each marriage. They don't make the cut for the film. But one thing that is noticeably absent is the scene where Scarlett is attacked when she's going through the shanty town. In the book, she's actually attacked by a person of color. She's attacked by a Black man. And the film changes it to being a white man. And in the book, it's not just a political meeting. It is a meeting of the KKK. Rhett, Ashley, Mr. Kennedy, Dr. Mead, they are all members of the KKK in the book.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and that's actually what is the political meeting. The film erases that and obviously changes it where Rhett's not even there. Rhett tries to break it up. But that is a key aspect of the book that is left out, because I think the film is trying to sort of be this middle ground, whereas the book was a lot less of a middle ground. And like, even then, the film still is glorifying these things and glamorizing it. They still sanitize in a way, shape, or form, because I think they were also, I don't know when the tide started to shift around the KKK, because obviously when the film The Birth of a Nation came out, I believe that was in the 20s. I think that was 1928, maybe like 10 years before this film came out. That led to a resurgence. So by this time, I don't know if that would have been widely accepted. So the film does try to sanitize this history even more so, of like that this is what this was, and they try to cover that up, which again shows us that they even knew at the time that this was wrong, this was not right, and that there's this skewed message going on here, and they didn't really do anything to combat it. Yes, we can highlight that Hattie McDaniel gets an Oscar for her role, and she's the first Black woman to win the Best Supporting Actress for award for the Oscars, but they noticeably don't do anything when she can't attend the Atlanta premiere because the theater is still segregated and it's white only. The only person who actually speaks up is Clark Gable, and Clark Gable basically said, I will not go to the premiere if she can't be there. And she basically told him to stand down, that he like needed to go, and that she was like willing to sit that out or whatever if she wasn't allowed to be there. But the producers don't do anything about it. MGM doesn't do anything about it. So they have an opportunity where they could have, I think, made this right, and they could have adapted it to maybe be not as faithful to the book, but also could have been more rooted in history. It wasn't. And we can also identify that this is a 2022 lens looking back. Like, if they were adapting Gone with the Wind today, A, I don't know if they would be adapting it, but B, it probably would have been closer to what history would have actually looked like, and the story would have been probably drastically changed. So, but this is 1939,
Yeah.
and they still have to sell this movie of a very, very, very popular book that was a blockbuster of its day, and they couldn't really deviate from that. They were not striving to create a historical film with this. They were trying to make as much money as possible from this film. So, but yeah.
I think I could see them, if anything, if they did something in 2022, like you kind of were alluding to. I don't think it would be Gone with the Wind 2.0, but I could see them, which they've done with a lot of not controversial movies, but classic movies that had a lot of discrimination from different culture, ethnic, gender. What they've done now, it's like the making of a movie. So perhaps like the making of Gone with the Wind, and everything kind of wrong surrounding how that process came about. And I'm not fully like aware of the entire process, so I can't say if, from start to finish, it was completely like discriminatory or unfair or anything like that. But just in terms of like, I know like the Mary Poppins movie that came out, like
Saving Mr. Banks.
Yes, thank you. Like, I know that was controversial, even just that coming out, because how dare they be anything bad said about like Disney in that aspect. And like, it's Mary Poppins, we all love Mary Poppins, but like, there's discrimination on that front with her being a woman. So I could see them doing something like that to then make a testament and like bringing awareness of like that was not done and handled the way it should have been.
Yeah. And I think I even said this when we were prepping for the episode. Like, I could see a mini series based on Gone with the Wind where they try to make it a little bit more historically accurate. Like, I'm thinking sort of along the lines of the Netflix and CBC show Anne with an E, where they take the story of Anne of Green Gables, but they base it a little bit more in the reality. Anne now has a more realistic, I think, approach to life based on her experiences. Yes, she has optimism and she has hope, but she is still a traumatized child. They incorporate other people who were present in Canada at that time, but are not really represented in the stories. They include people of color. They include First Nations people. They include those storylines in tandem with the white characters. I could see them maybe making this into a mini series where it's a little bit more based in the reality. The horrors of slavery may be a little bit more prevalent, maybe even giving more of a backstory to who Mammy is, who Prissy is, like what are their stories, who are these people. And I know that in recent years, I think there's even a book that has been written about like a potential, I don't know if it's authorized by Margaret Mitchell's estate, the author, but they did write a book about Mammy's perspective, and they did give her a name. I believe they call her Ruth, and they do try to tell the story through her eyes. I also don't know if that would ever be made in America. I don't know if America would be able to handle
To swallow that pill.
to swallow that. And I think they would say, like, how dare you mess with a classic? I could see like the BBC or somewhere like overseas maybe doing it. I don't see America being able to even contemplate this story being revised to be more realistic. So
I feel like if anything were to come from that, though, this would be a great time to really dig into that part of it, into that historical aspect or to that character background, because I mean, there are a lot more spotlights on it, on now more accurately portraying Black history. And I think it's serving the portrayal and giving spotlight to those that would be either whitewashed, we never would have heard of these characters, these backgrounds, these stories, or some of them, you know, we know that the stories have come from a certain place, but we've been led to believe that they originate somewhere else and the characters look different, act different. But now we're hearing from the origin points, which I think is really special.
I actually found a book. You just tell me there's a book, and I go full Lady Gaga on it. I found it's called Ruth's Journey, the authorized novel of Mammy from Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind by Donald McCaig. It came out in 2014, October 14, 2014. It's 400 pages.
wow. Is that the same author who does Rhett Butler's People? Because that's the other authorized sequel.
Let me see.
Prequel to Gone with the Wind.
I didn't even know these things existed.
There's another one, Scarlett, that was also made into a miniseries that did not get such great reviews. That is a sequel. And the Margaret Mitchell estate was not, well, so I'm going to say allegedly was not happy with it based on the author who wrote Rhett Butler's People, who did also work with the estate.
He was the author who wrote, yes, he was the author that wrote
Gotcha.
that. Yes.
So.
I came out in 2007, so Mammy's story came out in 2014. So, yeah.
I definitely would want to pick that up. And it would be interesting, too, like, so the Mammy's supposed to be a prequel, too?
Yes.
Or is it just all...
I think it's a prequel / like side midquel, where it's like her journey before Gone with the Wind, and then...
Think of it as Wicked, and then you see it in Wicked, which is like, think of it like that.
I think that would be awesome.
That's my next. Both of those books are my next Amazon.
Yeah,
this for Christmas this year. Yep. There we go.
So, and obviously, like, we can talk about the problematic aspects of the film in terms of race. I think we also can highlight the very problematic aspects of the film as it relates to gender and romantic relationships. How this is definitely sold as a romance. And I'm curious to your y'all's thoughts watching this film in 2022. Do we consider this a romance still? Do we still see this as hashtag couple goals, or
hashtag no?
Tell us more, Chris. What's your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, this film is about the war and the casualties that went through that whole aspect, the trauma that ensued with it. There's no romantic aspect, and whether there is a romantic aspect, it's just completely derailed from what is going on in the present. Like they tried to maximize on Rhett and Scarlett's romance, and then they traveled to Scarlett and Ashley's romance, but that sidelined because Ashley could give a fig about Scarlett's wants and needs, and it's trying to be something that's not when it's talking about romance. When people try to classify it as a romantic film, it's not. It's a historical It's a historical film, something that is seen in documentaries that's about the Civil War. We see different clips from the film that are put in documentaries that are about like the times during that that time. And there's no romantic aspect given throughout this whole film. Yes, of course, there's the marriages and the downfalls and the children and the everything, but there's no hint of romance that I can gather that is sweeping me off my feet, that I don't feel in this film as a whole.
Ashley, what are your thoughts?
I think as I've gotten older, that has changed. If you were to ask me that, like, prior to me even being 16, I hands down would be like, of course it's a romance movie. Have you seen the front cover? But honestly, looking at it as you get older and rewatching, and then also, right, I think when you're younger, you're not really paying attention to the dialogue. You're paying attention to what do they look like, or what are their feelings? Are they kissing? Are they holding each other? And then obviously you've got the beautiful music in the background to help indicate, I think, to what you were alluding to earlier, Nate, like how you should be feeling. And like, what are the colors and the lighting in the background? So that's what I had categorized as like my romantic cues for the movie and the film. But I mean, being an adult, even at 16, watching it and actually listening to the dialogue and kind of taking away, like you said, the glamorizing factors and taking those layers away, it's not a romance, because I don't think there's, to Chris's point, like a consistent real romance, except maybe if you're looking at it from their perspective of Ashley and Mel, but you don't really see their whole romantic aspects. So as you would with most romance films or like adaptations, they center around either a solid couple or a few solid couples. They may like maybe jump around or change up the partners, but you don't really see that except from Scarlett's view. You don't see Ashley and Mel's background romance. Like, how did they meet? How did they fall in love? You kind of just have to take their word for how they feel towards one another and why they feel that way. And you're just kind of put in the middle of, Scarlett is obsessed with Ashley. We didn't really see a background of like, how did she become obsessed with him? What was her first experiences before Mel was in the picture of him? It's very superficial, her romances. And you start to see that as you get older. There's really no deep connection or love there. I think to that regard, Clark Gable and Vivian just had really great chemistry. So it makes you want for that romance to work and that it to be the romance of the movie. But I don't think it actually holds up in that regard. And like Chris said, I think it's more of a historical, I would say, drama for sure. With some of that sprinkled in, but only in the context of like what I feel like a normal person could handle at that time. And honestly, for a lot of it, being in survival mode, like romance is not a factor. Love is not a factor. She's not pining over Rhett when he goes to war and being like, I'm worried for him. Is he going to come back? It's just purely in a sense of security. And she'll just move on if he would have died, she would have just moved on to the next buddy who comes along that can give her something that she can not necessarily take advantage of, but spin into something profitable and secure. And there's no romance in that.
I wish I could see back in time when like the book came out, if it was marketed as a romance, or was it marketed purely as like a historical drama, because I believe the first edition cover, you really don't see much. It's the first cover, I believe, is just the words "Gone with the Wind," and then there's like a little itty bitty picture of Scarlett in her hoop skirt outside Tara, and that's all you see. You don't see anything with Rhett. It's not like the film where Vivian Leigh is draped over Clark Gable's arms, and they're like, and it's also a scene that I think never really happens in the film. The only thing I can think of like where she's in his arms like that is when he's literally taking her up the stairs to have his way with her, which is again another sanitized aspect of the film that is supposed to be, in the book, marital rape. Like, Scarlett is not consenting to this. This is not something that she wanted to be a part of. In the film, it shows her the next day and she's all dewy and happy and like, oh, this is just what I needed. And it's like, oh God, no, this is gross. This is not actually what it was meant to be.
And that's a theme I also noticed watching it. Not that I hadn't seen it sooner, but Yeah, is that yes? That's the cover.
And I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that is the copy that I had in high school when I read it. I'm
I bought this
curious
with you,
again.
actually. Remember, we went to Barnes and Noble one day and with your mom, and you told me, oh, the paperback is much more cheaper than the hardcover, so you convinced me to buy this version of the book, and it still hasn't been read yet.
Same here. I've cracked it a couple of times, but it
I've
is
only
a big
gotten up
treat.
to like page 16.
Buckle up. There is a lot
It's a
of
long ride.
it is a long ride, and it gives you a lot of, I think, the questions that you have from the movie of like, why does Scarlett love Ashley so much? What is the aspect of Ashley and Mellie's relationship? Although we know the answer to how Ashley and Mellie met, they just met at a family reunion because that's what one does, I guess. But
I actually wanted to discuss a little bit about what you touched on, Nathaniel, about the quote unquote rape scene. As I was rewatching that scene, my first inclination was I wanted Scarlett's robe, Vivian's robe that she wears, the red
it's
robe.
a beautiful robe.
I want that.
Beautiful clothes,
We
beautiful
all do.
gowns.
That whole the whole way that the film is shot. You know what actually went? I don't know if you did a little research, but we have our old friend George Cukor, or as Emily calls her, Cukor.
George Cukor.
We have him and Victor Fleming. Now, Vivian loved George's kindness, his way of trying to get her to coax her to do a scene, whereas Victor
George
was
is a baby
no-nonsense.
angel that needs to be protected at all costs.
Exactly. We love George Cukor. We love him. Although
Victor Fleming.
Yes, and then we have
Victor Fleming,
who we have him being a no-nonsense Judy Garland slapping person who doesn't give a crap about anyone's acting preference. He just wants the scene to get done and doesn't take no one's shit for anything. I think Vivian preferred George rather than Victor because Victor treated her like some sort of pack mule. He just expected her to just become Scarlett and just do the work and get it done and not be able to ask questions, not to be asking questions, not to be lost my train of thought, but
kind of just shut up and do what I say.
Basically,
just like perform.
Kind of like Rhett to Scarlett.
But that whole scene that I wanted to discuss was that whole rape scene in general. Do we think it's a rape scene? Is that what we're coming to? Is that
I feel like that's the assumption,
right?
But I mean, I don't know. Is it portrayed differently in the book?
If I'm remembering, and like it's been a hot minute since I've read the book, but I think one of the criticisms of the film compared to the book is that the book really does portray it as marital rape, and that Scarlett is not consenting to this.
Okay.
The film, I think, at best or at worst, I don't know if I'm phrasing this right, I think at like it's blurred because she's clearly resisting in the scene beforehand. She does not want this. The morning after, she seems happy that it happened, and she's like almost like confused as to why he's apologizing for it the morning after. And I think, again, it's the film making a deliberate choice to sanitize, because they also had they had to really, I think, save up their scandalousness for the dam that happens at the end of the movie, because they probably had to fight tooth and nail to get that included in there. So they probably had to make sure this film was as squeaky clean as possible, which, again, you're watching the film. I think it still has a G rating on Amazon when you watch it, and I'm just like, I don't know if I would rate this as G.
It is. Even on iTunes, it's rated G.
Oh my gosh.
Meanwhile, Tangled, for reference, is PG. Because I'm pretty sure there's a fart joke in there. But yeah, no, I think the film makes a very I think they make a choice to blur it. And I think we can at least see in the beginning there is no consent. It's the after that leaves it very what is happening here. Yeah, I don't know, maybe she changes her mind somewhere between the stairs and the bedroom. I don't think so, though, and Yeah.
I
don't
think it's
think
like that play on, the romance where like the woman's resisting and the guy's like trying to coax her, and then, she gets angry and fights, but then it's like, it's supposed to end with it just, don't talk to me or I'm mad at you. Then you forcibly grab her face and like force a kiss on her, and she's supposed to like melt in your arms type of dramatic
I
romance.
just needed a man to put me in my place.
Exactly. And
that's what I needed.
I think also earlier in the film, and I think when I was younger, I didn't want to see it because I just was so convinced they were meant to be. She was kind of resisting him the whole way through.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, there was also, especially it stood out to me this past weekend, when he helps her leave Atlanta with Mel and the baby just being born, and was able to steal like the cart and the horse for her, and then got her out of the city, and then eventually had changed his kind of mind on his feeling about the war, and he wants to then join up, and then just basically leaves her. And she's like, oh my God, you're just leaving me here? Like, what the heck? You're supposed to essentially be my stability, and now you're going to leave me here all by myself with all these people to take care of. And he's giving the reasons why he wants to join up, which seemingly you're like, oh, like maybe he's feeling bad, or he wants to be a hero. Like, yay, he's even better than what we thought. And then he's like wanting her to give him a kiss goodbye because he doesn't know if he'll survive or not, or he'll see her again. And at first thought, you probably want to be like, yeah, give him a kiss. You don't know when you're going to see him or if he'll die. Like, it'll be the last thing that you do. And she doesn't want to. She says no. She puts her arms up. He's trying to grab her, and he actually, I think, picks her up off the cart to forcefully put her on the ground in front of him and forces a kiss. And you wait for it. And I was like, even just watching just to wait, like, does she melt? Do they show her melting?
Doesn't.
She doesn't. And I think
not.
that's a testament to Vivian. I don't know. I can't 100% say that. I think that's a true testament to her character. She did not want to. She did not melt. She didn't feel bad. She didn't worry for his safety. She did not want that. Not what she wanted at all. So I feel like that's also a testament to like kind of that survivor mentality of then maybe she changes her mind in air quotes because he can provide her stability and security, and they seemingly get along. But even just the wording of like how they are meant to be in air quotes, because he gives the justification that they're the same person, and then he just further describes who they are or who he thinks they are, basically telling her, mansplaining, this is who you are because it's very similar to me, and doesn't categorize himself as like a hero or that great of a person, and that they're shallow and such. And it's like, that's not romantic at all. You're basically telling me I'm a shitty person and that you are too, so we're meant to be. So in that aspect, I'm like, that is toxic.
Oh, yeah. So I think we're all on the same page here, is that this film definitely does not hold up as a romance movie, not the movie you want to maybe have a first date with someone and watch with them, unless you met at a family reunion like Melly and Ashley.
And your cousins,
Wilkes.
I guess.
Not our guest Ashley. Ashley is not
Thank you.
dating her cousins. But yeah, no. So I think we're all kind of on this, like, the film does not hold up very well, and it does not age gracefully or as beautiful as it maybe would have liked to. I also don't think that was the intention when they made this movie. I don't think they were intending to create a movie that was supposed to stand up to the test of time. I think that happens later. I think history decides what films survive, what films get to be considered classics. As we're kind of concluding this episode, the final thought, I think, is this a film that should not be seen, or is this a film that should continue to be seen? Kind of, again, like, is this a film that gets #canceled? Is this a film that still gets to exist in the American film history, I guess?
When you talk about American films, the films that came out, the two films that came out during that time period was Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. One of those films, both of these films have become icons and masterpieces in their own way, but I believe both of these films have two different categories. One, Oz, has to do with the feeling of hope, the feeling of acceptance, the feeling of being a part of something even though you're just a visitor in this world. Whereas the other one, the one Gone with the Wind, has a feeling of despair, has a feeling of, yes, this is the world that we live in. This is what has happened in history. But just because it's depicted that way doesn't mean that it's not a classic in its own right. And when we compare those two films, especially since that Wizard of Oz is going to be our next film that we will be talking about, we can pull back the curtain and see how both of these films have this resonance with audiences. And I think that's kind of why I believe this film is a sort of what we've said during this episode. It is in its own way a time capsule. It's going to stay under the ground, and it will then be revitalized during certain points of our lives. Whereas The Wizard of Oz, we can just put it on in the background as background noise, and we won't think anything of it. But when you watch a film as historic as a sort of time bubble, as Gone with the Wind, you have to look at all the aspects of that film. You have to peel back the layers, and you have to see what it means to, one, be an American, two, understand the racism that comes with this film, and three, see how it has held up during the subsequent years. It has been reissued, redone, restored in its own right. And you have to look at that aspect. You have to see the painstaking measures that everyone went through to make this film the way that it's supposed to be viewed as now. And of course, we see that the card at the beginning of the film, yes, we know that it's a piece of time where at that time it wasn't really thought of as, oh, this is a racism film. This is a film that might offend other people. They just made that film. They made Gone with the Wind to signify a point in time, to show people, yes, we went through this horrific time during our lives, but we're trying to preserve that right. We're trying to preserve it in its own time capsule and have other people enjoy it in their own right.
Thank you, Chris. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
I am a big proponent of hating anything to be purely just canceled. And I get why certain things or certain people or whatnot are to a degree, especially if they, if there's no remorse shown or there's no growth that comes with whatever the problematic thing is. If there's no growth, nobody spotlights what was wrong with it, in and outside of the situation and the parties involved, I think, well, then there's no lesson learned. So in that respect, or if you're just simply glorifying it, obviously that's wrong. But I think with this, this film context is key. And I think you can look at it from so many different lenses. I would hate to see that completely be washed away. And not just all the work that was put into it, but I mean, I could also see this being utilized in other film courses, and maybe it's something that is in a film course. I haven't taken one myself, but I could see this being at different levels or different themes in the film course. This could come up and tick a lot of those boxes, especially for that time period in history. So I think it should be watched. Definitely, maybe not at a G rating. Let's maybe move that up and have people watching it, let's have the audience informed. So I really enjoyed what TCM did when having that little intro, even just that little summarization of the context and the climate around this movie coming out and afterwards. and a little bit sprinkled in of like the time period it covers, that at least is doing the justification and the maybe not true justice it deserves, but it's giving you the audience who maybe has never seen this seeing it for the first time, doesn't know the context. Maybe it's someone who's not an American and therefore they don't really read up on the Civil War, were taught that in school. I think that gives it a nice contextual bubble to then understand and put yourself in that mindset of here's what you're kind of getting into, and just take that as further understanding when you're watching this in full. Because it's a 4-hour long movie. So it's something that I feel like definitely not just because of you sitting in the seat for that long, but you need to take, I think, mental breaks to digest. So you're not going to get everything on the first watch. Something that you need to rewatch. You can watch it with a different lens every time and learn something new. So I hate to see films like that be washed away or overshadowed, and that may not have been their intention when they made it, but it's certainly something that lessons can be learned from, not just the time frame it covers, but all of the other, injustice surrounding it in the time that it was brought to light. And the actors involved, not just their characters. So I feel like it shouldn't be canceled. I feel like it very much should still be watched. Just having that informed, like maybe that warning label, that's important. And I would hope that's something that would spur good discussion.
Yeah. And I agree with you both. I think this film can continue to exist with a big asterisk next to it. And I think that context, I like what you said, Ashley, is context is key. And I think we have to recognize the time in which this movie was made. I think we have to recognize the level of education that the folks making this movie had. And we've come I would like to think that we as a society have come a long way. I hope and I pray that is the case. We have to keep that in mind. And it's like you said, I can see this film being a very good lesson in filmmaking. I think it's, again, the special effects alone are worth... we just don't see even special effects like that anymore. We just don't. And I think it's important to know the context in which that this is made, that this is clearly, it's historical fiction. And it is a very fictionalized version of our history as Americans. I also worry if we cancel if we cancel media, not the whole freedom of speech argument that people like to throw out there. I worry that if things get canceled and they supposedly disappear, that people start to ignore the reality of what happened. And not that people are going to forget slavery. We have to remember that there are a whole lot of people who still view the South this way, who still view the Civil War this way, that maybe don't even refer to it as the Civil War, but refer to it as the War of Northern Aggression. Yeah. And there's a basis for this. And I think if we were to delete this movie, it makes a lot less sense where we are now. And I'm not saying the film causes this. I'm saying that this very rose-tinted perception of the Old South is what is the forerunner, like the grandfather, the great-grandfather of the views that maybe we have today. In some areas of this country and some areas of the world as well. So I'm kind of in agreement with you both. I think it's a film that we can't just delete, because I think deleting it would be the same thing as saying that it never happened. And I don't think that this is the film that again, people of color, Black people need to know that this happened in the history or whatever. I think it's a learning opportunity for white folks, the people who are very represented in this movie, of this is how maybe we viewed it, but this is not the way it actually happened. I say we as a white person, not that I'm agreeing with the film. I think it's at the point where we can disagree with a lot of the specific themes of the film, and we can still recognize that on a technical level, there are a lot of impressive techniques used in it. It's, again, like I said, it very much is like the Old South on the surface. It's very beautiful. And when you dig deeper, it is not so great. And it is very problematic. So I think, like I said, it exists and it has a big asterisk next to it that needs a lot of context. And I would hope would spur a lot of discussion and not just be viewed at face value, because certainly there's a place for films like that. There are lots of films that we don't just watch for entertainment purposes. There are films that we watch and they lead to a commentary and a dialogue. So, yeah, awesome.
Well, thank you both for having me. I love this. This was awesome.
Thank you for joining us.
I look forward to listening to more episodes and maybe being on a future one. Very excited to see how this develops.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Chris, for having me here as well. And we will see. Well, we'll talk to our audiences in our next episode, which will, like Chris said, be featuring the classic 1939 film, another 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz, which is one of our favorites. And we'll have quite a few guests who will be on to share their experiences with it as well. All right. So until next time.